I am Vincent Marchetti, 72 years old, and I watched my son Lucas call the emergency board meeting in our conference room, the one I built 40 years ago when this winery was 3 acres and a dream. He stood at the head of the table with his architect's renderings spread out like a prosecution exhibit: luxury wedding venue, condominium towers, projected revenue streams. The Vineyard model is dead, he announced to shareholders he'd quietly courted for months. We're sitting on prime real estate while Dad talks to his grapes and refuses to modernize. The vote was unanimous. I was removed as chief executive of my own company, effective immediately. Lucas smiled like a man who'd just inherited his kingdom early. I gathered my notepad and reading glasses. Walked to the door without looking back. My hands didn't shake. That surprised me. Maybe after you've spent 50 years grafting vines in February cold, your nervous system learns what real damage feels like. Corporate betrayal registers differently than frostbite. Lucas called after me, something about transition planning and consulting roles. I kept walking. Down the hallway past photographs of harvest crews from 1993, 1998, 2004. My hallway. My photographs. My life's work catalogued in frames Lucas probably couldn't wait to replace with abstract art and design awards. Outside, the afternoon sun hit the Sangiovese vines at that angle that turns the leaves copper. I stood there breathing the smell of fermenting must from the crush pad, letting my heart rate settle. Lucas appeared in the doorway behind me, phone already pressed to his ear, probably calling his architect to accelerate demolition timelines. He thought he'd won. He thought voting me off a board meant he controlled the land beneath his expensive shoes. That's the problem with business school. They teach you about governance structures and shareholder agreements. They don't teach you about irrevocable land trust your father established in 1991. I drove home to the cottage at the vineyard's edge. The truck was a 2008 Ford, dented and reliable, with dirt permanently ground into the floor mats. Lucas had offered to buy me something newer last Christmas. Said it reflected poorly on the brand. I declined. The cottage was stone and timber, built the year Lucas was born, when this whole operation was just me and 12 acres of rocky soil everyone said wouldn't grow anything worth drinking. Inside smelled like wood smoke and old leather. I made coffee in the aluminum percolator my father brought from Piedmont. Sat at the kitchen table with the documents I kept in a fireproof safe behind the bookshelf. The Land Trust Charter. 43 pages of legal architecture I'd commissioned from the best agricultural attorney in Napa. Established 35 years ago when Lucas was still in high school and I was starting to understand what wealth does to families. The terms were simple and irreversible. All vineyard acreage held in perpetuity for agricultural use. No commercial development permitted. No sale or transfer without trustee approval. Trustee, Vincent Marchetti. Sole trustee. Irrevocable during my lifetime and 20 years beyond. I'd let Lucas believe the company owned the land because I wanted him to learn the business from the ground up, to earn respect through competence. Instead he'd learn to court shareholders and hire architects. My mistake. I'd confused patience with indefinite tolerance. That confusion ended today in the conference room when he smiled. The next morning I drove to the winery at my usual time. 6:30. Lucas's Audi was already there, chrome gleaming in the fog. Inside, he'd commandeered my old office. The desk was covered with blueprints and marketing materials. Luxury destination wedding venue. Boutique condominium development. Wine country lifestyle brand. I stood in the doorway holding 2 cups of coffee. He looked up, startled, then recovered with practiced charm. Dad, good, we should talk transition. I brought you coffee, I said and set both cups on his desk. Sat down in the chair across from him like I'd done 10,000 times before. He relaxed. This was the script he expected. Defeated old man accepting his diminished role. So you're really doing this, I said, gesturing at the blueprints. Wedding venue, condos, the whole conversion. His eyes lit up. It's visionary, Dad. This property is worth $12 million as a vineyard. As developed real estate, we're looking at $70 million minimum. The investors are already circling. We break ground in April. I nodded slowly, studying the renderings. They were glossy and professional. Computer-generated couples holding wine glasses on terraces that didn't exist yet. Where does the water come from? I asked. He blinked. What? For 70 units plus a commercial venue. That's significant draw on the aquifer. You secure the rights. He waved a hand. That's handled. Part of the land package. I scratched my jaw, pretending to think. And the yeast strain, the Marchetti proprietary blend. That's licensed to the company. He smiled. Dad, everything's locked down. The attorneys have been through it. You don't need to worry about details anymore. I stood up. Left both coffees untouched. Okay, I said. Just wanted to understand the plan. He was already back on his phone before I closed the door. That afternoon I watched him give a tour to 3 men in tailored suits. Investment group from San Francisco. He walked them through the crush facility explaining how all this equipment would be liquidated. Pointed at the vineyard explaining where the main building would sit, the parking structure, the event lawn. One of the investors asked about permits. Lucas laughed. My father established this operation before half the current regulations existed. We're grandfathered into everything that matters. I stood by the equipment shed watching through the window. Lucas saw me and turned the group away, probably embarrassed by the old man in dusty jeans. That evening he brought paperwork to the cottage. Consulting agreement. $5,000 monthly. Non-compete clause. Immediate signature required. I read it twice while he stood in my kitchen checking his phone. This says I can't work in wine production for 5 years. It's standard, Dad. We can't have you starting a competing operation. There was a stain on his collar. Coffee or wine. His shoes were Italian leather, pristine, never touched earth. I signed the document. He left without saying goodbye. 3 weeks passed. I maintained my routine. Morning walks through the vineyard checking bud break. Afternoons in the cottage reviewing old harvest logs and trust documents. Lucas accelerated everything. Hired a demolition consultant. Scheduled community meetings to present the development plan. The local paper ran a feature. 4th-generation winery embraces evolution. Lucas posed for photographs in front of the fermentation tanks, talking about honoring tradition while building the future. He mentioned me once. My father built something beautiful here but couldn't see beyond the vines. We're expanding his vision. I cut the article out and pinned it to my wall. Evidence. The Saturday before demolition bids were due, Lucas hosted a celebration at the winery. Investors, local officials, the architecture firm, his girlfriend who worked in marketing. I wasn't invited but I came anyway, parking the truck by the equipment shed. Through the window I watched them toast with our 2018 Reserve Cabernet. $65 a bottle retail. Lucas had opened a case for people who'd never appreciate the difference between that and grocery store wine. The girlfriend suggested a photo opportunity. Everyone gathered on the crush pad with the vineyard behind them. Lucas stood at the center, arms spread like a man who owned the world. Someone asked where his father was. He glanced toward the cottage and said something that made them laugh. Probably a joke about my stubbornness or age. The photographer counted down and they all smiled for the camera that would document this moment in the development timeline. I watched from the shadows by the shed, my hands in my pockets, waiting. After they left, I walked through the facility one more time. Ran my hand along the stainless steel tanks. Checked the climate control systems. Everything I'd built over half a century, about to be liquidated by a man who'd never grafted a vine or waded through a spring frost praying the buds would survive. My phone vibrated. Text from Lucas. Dad, stop coming to the winery. It's not yours anymore. I typed back, understood. Then I called my attorney. The demolition company arrived Monday at 8 in the morning. 2 trucks, a crew of 6, equipment for preliminary soil testing and survey work. Lucas met them in the parking area wearing a hard hat, playing contractor. I drove up 30 minutes later in the old Ford, parked blocking the access road. Lucas walked over, irritation barely concealed. Dad, you can't be here. This is a work site. I stayed in the truck, window down, and pulled out a manila folder. I need to give you something, I said. He sighed, took the folder, opened it standing there in the morning sun. I watched his face as he read the first page. The Land Trust Charter. His expression went from confusion to concentration to something that looked like physical pain. What is this? That's the legal entity that owns all Vineyard acreage, I said. Established in 1991. You were 16. His hands started shaking. This says agricultural use only. No development. No sale. That's correct. This isn't possible. The company owns this land. The company leases this land from the trust. I'm the trustee. He flipped through pages, reading faster, looking for an exit that didn't exist. The water rights he'd claimed were handled. My name. The yeast strain patent he'd assumed was company property. My name. The trust terms that couldn't be modified or dissolved. My signature. His face went white then red. You sabotaged your own company. I built protections for land you were determined to destroy. There's a difference. The demolition crew watched from a distance, sensing the shift in authority. Lucas turned toward them, then back to me, understanding arriving in stages like a poison spreading through his system. The investors. I told them we break ground in April. That's unfortunate. The bank loans I secured against the property value. Also unfortunate. He grabbed the truck door. You can't do this. I just did. $70 million in development. Gone. His voice was rising, losing control. Do you understand what you've done? I looked at him, this man I'd raised, who'd learned to smile while betraying people. I prevented you from destroying 50 years of work for a short-term profit you didn't earn. The trust stands. The vineyard stays. You can keep your title and your board seat and your architect. None of it matters. He stood there breathing hard, probably calculating legal options that didn't exist, appeals that would fail, arguments that sounded hollow even in his own head. Finally he said the only thing left. I'm your son. You are. And you voted me out of my own company without hesitation. This is me returning the favor with interest. I started the truck. The demolition crew was already packing up, no longer getting paid for work that couldn't happen. Lucas just stood there in his hard hat holding the folder, watching his $70 million future collapse into a learning experience about reading contracts and respecting foundations. Lucas tried fighting it for 6 weeks. Hired 3 different law firms. They all reached the same conclusion. The trust was ironclad. The land use restrictions were permanent. His development deal died. The investors sued him for misrepresentation. The bank recalled their construction loans. By May he'd resigned from the company and moved to Seattle for some tech startup position his girlfriend's brother arranged. Before he left he came to the cottage one last time. Stood on the porch like a stranger asking for directions. I was repotting basil plants, my hands in soil. He said he didn't understand why I'd done this. I looked at him and saw a man who'd spent so much time learning to network and optimize and scale that he'd forgotten the only thing that mattered. You can't pave over roots and call it growth. He left without responding. I heard his Audi start up and drive away, expensive and fast, carrying him toward whatever life he'd build with people who measured value in revenue projections. The vineyard is quiet now. I hired back the crew Lucas fired, the ones who actually knew pruning schedules and fermentation timing. Promoted my assistant winemaker to run operations. I spend mornings walking the rows, checking leaf health and cluster development. The vines are coming back strong after a wet winter. The Sangiovese especially, those copper leaves catching light the way they have for 40 years. My hands still smell like earth and wine must. The cottage still smells like wood smoke. The truck still runs fine despite Lucas's embarrassment. Some afternoons I sit on the crush pad with coffee, watching the valley turn gold in the evening sun, and I think about what my father taught me in Piedmont. Land doesn't belong to you. You belong to it. Your job is to protect it and pass it forward to someone who understands that relationship. I tried with Lucas. He chose differently. So I made a different choice too. Never mistake patience for weakness. Never assume silence means consent. And never underestimate an old man who spent 50 years learning the difference between growth that builds and growth that destroys. If you value integrity over applause, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment to let me know you're out there. Tell me where you're watching from. We are building a brotherhood here where your experience becomes someone else's survival guide. We share the losses and the victories so the next man knows how to spot the snake in the grass. Protect your peace, guard your resources, and always remember that you are the architect of your own outcome. The check always comes due.